All right, so we're picking up chapter 3 of Pirkei Avos, which is where we started from this time around. Last week we learned the first Mishnah. You can either follow along in the source sheet that I sent, which has the Mishnayos, the two Mishnahs that we hope to get to, or you can have your own Mishnah, or you can just listen. Okay, so Mishnah Beis, Mishnah Bet, the second Mishnah, says as follows: Rabbi Chanina Sigan HaKohanim Omer. Rabbi Chanina, the vice high priest, said, "Have a mispalel b'shloma shel malchus." Pray for the shalom, the peace, the welfare of the government, the kingship. She'ilmalei mora'a, for were it not for the fear that the government puts on man, ish esreyehu chayim bilao. Every man would swallow his fellow or his neighbor alive. Wow, what a pleasant thought to begin our lunchtime with. If not for the authority and the fear inspired by a governing body, then everybody would there would be anarchy. Everybody would swallow up each other. It would just be, I guess you could say, survival of the fittest, and the strong would take advantage of the weak. And so we should daven, we should pray for the welfare of the state. And in fact, in many shuls they do that. They have a special prayer on Shabbos for the government, and that's not just for the government on itself, but also for how the government relates to us as the people. So what does the Midrash Shmuel have to say about this Mishnah? So for those who were not here last week, in this class we are learning Pirkei Avos with one commentary, which is the commentary of the Midrash Shmuel, or Shmuel de Uzida, who was a 16th century scholar in Sfat, along with many other famous rabbis that were there, the Arizal and Reb Chaim Vital and others, Rabbi Yosef Karo. So it was a good, would have been awesome to be there basically at that time. But we weren't, but we fortunately have so many of their teachings. So Shmuel de Uzida has a extensive commentary on Pirkei Avos called Midrash Shmuel, and in it he doesn't just bring his own ideas, he also quotes from other commentators. But he was clearly also a very original thinker and very analytical. He looks at the Mishnah very carefully and understands that there's more than meets the eye in every one of these teachings. So what does he have to say about this Mishnah? So we really have to understand it in context of the previous Mishnah, which taught as follows. The first Mishnah of the chapter said, Akavya ben Mahalal Omer, Akavya ben Mahalal says, look at three things and you won't come to sin. A person has to focus on three things to avoid sin. And those three things were, just on, again, we spent a whole class speaking about them, but just on the most basic level, to remember where we come from, which is from a tipa srucha, a putrid drop. Everybody comes from just a drop of semen, and where are we going? We're all going to end up in the grave, among worms and maggots. And the last thing was, remember who we're going to stand before in judgment. And if a person keeps these three things in mind, then they will remain humble, and it will protect them from sin. That's the basic reading of that Mishnah. So says the Midrash Shmuel that this teaching now of Rabbi Chanina is coming off of the heels of that teaching. And that is to say, there is, okay, that it's not enough for us just to remember those three things. Maybe in a previous generation, maybe when this is, Rabbi Chanina in his generation, and it seems the implication is that the teaching of Akavya was from an earlier generation. I don't know the exact chronology, but that's how he seems to be explaining this. that maybe in previous generations it sufficed to just keep those three things in mind, and that would prevent us from sin. But now it's not. But for us, it's not enough. For us, we also need one more, at least one more deterrent, and that is just simple, good old fear of man. Putting aside all of the humility that we might be able to develop from keeping in mind those three things: where we came from, where we're going. Yes, that will keep us humble, and remember that we're going to stand judgment before God. But we're not all on that level to keep all that in mind. Another thing that keeps a person in line is simple fear of punishment, not punishment from God, even punishment from the government if we get out of line. And that, he says, it's not just that we can't keep all those things in mind, but we might have a response to each of those three things from the previous Mishnah. And he actually, again, very beautifully analytically reads it into this Mishnah, that we're in this one line as a response to all those three things. A person will say, right, we said, remember where you come from a putrid drop. Well, you know what? So do you. So who cares, right? We're all come from the same putrid drop. We're all, and look at me now, we came from the same place, but now I'm better than you. So I could take advantage of you. Yeah, I also come from nothing, but look at me now. Now I'm much better than you, so I could take advantage from you. So, and he says that's what can happen if there's no fear of the government, etc. That's the line. If not for the fear, ish esrei ehu, each person to their friend, to their fellow, would swallow them alive, because they'll say, oh, you're also from nothing. You're equal to me in that way. So I can take advantage of you, if not for the fear of the government. The way he says it is, a person will say, I'm not saying I'm better than angels. I'm not better than angels, maybe, but someone else who's also born a man and also comes from the same place that I do. Well, look at me now. Now I'm strong. Now I can take advantage of them. That's the idea that each person would take advantage of their friend, if not for the fear of the kingship. Now, the second thing that Akavia and the previous Mishnah told us to remember was, remember where you're going. You're going to end up in the grave. So to that we say, well, it's true, but look, right now I'm alive, so that doesn't deter me. Right now I'm alive. Right now I'm here, and that doesn't strike fear into me to remember that we're all going to end up in the grave with worms and maggots, so that's supposed to keep me humble. But for many people, they don't worry about the future. Live, and be married today. For tomorrow you die. Like, okay, so tomorrow I'll die, but right now I want to live the way I want to live. So that's the line of the Mishnah. Chayim below. What's this word? Chayim, alive. They'll swallow each other alive, right? That's this idea that a person will say, well, right now I'm alive, so that doesn't deter me. And that's what will bring about that each one will swallow up their friend, if not for that fear of the kingship. And therefore, he doesn't directly address the third thing of Akavi. The third thing was to remember that in the future you're going to stand before judgment, before God. That he doesn't read into this line, but he says that's what this Mishnah is coming to add. The Mishnah is coming to add that if the previous three teachings, if the previous three ideas to keep in mind don't speak to a person, or if a person tries to justify or rationalize, that's not a reason to behave, but maybe at least the fear of the government will keep us in line. Now, of course, that's like a very specific type of the government's not going to be making sure that I pray. The government's not going to be making sure that I keep the mitzvos. So that's more specifically going to address maybe the way if we treat each other within the bounds of the law. So it's a little bit limited in its impact, but that is what this is coming to add. And then he ends off with the point that I began, that he's not coming to argue on a kavya ben mahalel. He's not coming to argue and say those three things don't work, but he's saying that it might depend on the generation and the spiritual level of the people, and for some that's not going to be enough. And in our generation, in his generation, we need a little bit more fear to keep us in line. Robert.
I just wonder, sometimes the government, this seems to be implicitly assuming that the government's actually going to try and enforce some interpersonal decency. What if the government is a real tyranny and is encouraging people to inform on each other and is abusive? Right.
Yeah, I hear. So that's that we would say in Hebrew, ein hachanami, or in Aramaic, I guess, actually. Yes. In that case, then we probably shouldn't be praying for them. But if where it's applicable. So that's one approach. The second approach is very similar, but slightly different. And this he quotes from someone named Ri al-Mushnino, Rabbi Yehuda, I think, al-Mushnino, who says that maybe those three things will work for people who are righteous, but people who are wicked, they're not going to remember a kavya ben mahalel's lessons. That might work for us, hopefully. We learn Pirkei Avos, and we try to internalize it and make it a part of ourselves, and change the way that we act based on what we've learned. But lots of people are not learning Pirkei Avos and are not learning the teachings of a kavya ben mahalel. So what about them? What's going to keep them in line? That's where we now come in. We say that's why we have to pray for the peace of the kingdom, not to keep us in line necessarily, but to keep others in line, to keep those who are not going to listen to the teachings of a kavya ben mahalel, who are not going to keep those three things in mind and not come to sin. How are they going to be kept in line? So they need a little enforcement. They need these laws, and that's why we should pray for the government, the welfare of the government, to be able to enforce these laws for those who it's necessary for. And specifically, he says that it's the shloma shel malchus, which means the welfare of the government, not necessarily of the king. The government, meaning it's not this. At least this Mishnah is not saying pray for the king, pray for the president. That might be appropriate also, and depending when and where. But this is specifically saying the government in its ability to enforce law and to keep people in line. That's what we have to pray for, that people are able to keep in line. And I think we can certainly understand this. Unfortunately, in every generation, really, but that the people need a little. People need enforcement. We need that protection. Of course, we put our trust in God, but we also have to. We pray to God that He, puts the government in a position to protect us. Okay, so that's the second Mishnah, and now we can move to the third Mishnah, Mishnah 3. Okay, Mishnah 3 is another Rabbi Chanina, a different Rabbi Chanina, and it says as follows: Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion Omer. Rabbi Chanina, the son of Tradion, says, Shnayim sheyoshvin ve'eng beinein divrei Torah. Two people who are sitting and they don't have words of Torah between them. Harizeh Moshav Leitzim. This is a Moshav Leitzim. This is a dwelling, a sitting of scoffers. And it quotes a verse, Shenemar, as the verse says, the very first verse in Tehillim, in Psalms, that says, Uv'moshav Leitzim lo yashav, that he doesn't sit in the seats of sit amongst scoffers. Just opening up that. It's actually it's the first verse of Tehillim. The first verse of Tehillim of Psalm says, Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach b'atzas rishayim. Fortunate or praiseworthy is the person who doesn't walk in the guidance of the wicked, u'v'derech hatayim lo amad, and does not stand in the way of sins or sinners, u'v'moshav leitzim lo yashav, and does not sit among scorners or scoffers. So the Mishnah says, two who are sitting and they don't have Torah between them, that is a moshav leitzim. That's a sitting of scorners, and that's who the verse speaks of in Tehillim, that it says, moshav leitzim lo yashav, that he doesn't sit. Fortunate is the person who does not sit among scorners. Aval shnayim sheyoshvim, but two who sit, v'yesh beineim divrei Torah, and they do have words of Torah between them. Shechina sheruya beineim, God's presence dwells amongst them. Shenemar, as the verse says, and now it quotes a verse in the book of Malachi. The verse says, "Az nidberu yirei Hashem yishareu." Then the fearers of God spoke one to his friend, or will speak one to his friend. Vayakshev Hashem vayishma, and God will listen and hear, hearken and hear. Vayikasev sefer zikaron lefanav, and he'll write or in past tense, and a book of remembrance was written before him. Liyirei Hashem, for the fearers of God, and for those who think of his name. So that's a verse being brought as a proof that two who sit and have Torah, then God's presence is with them, because there it says that those who fear God will speak one to his friend. It doesn't say what they said, but the assumption, I guess, is they're speaking words of Torah. And it says, and God will listen. So you see God's presence is there, that God will listen. And then it says, I only know that that's true for two people who are sitting. How do I know that even one person sitting and involving himself or herself in Torah, that God gives them reward, establishes reward for them? Shenemar, as the verse says, Yeshev badad v'yidom kinatal alav, one who sits alone, v'yidom. For now, we'll use the translation that they use down here. This is a verse in Eicha, Lamentations. One who sits in stillness, in silence, kinatal alav, yet he takes reward for himself. It's a little difficult to use that translation, because if he's sitting in silence, then it doesn't sound like he's involved in Torah study, unless he's studying silently, which is possible. But that's the verse that it quotes, and that's the translation that I gave you for those using the source sheet. But from Sefaria. So just to summarize the Mishnah, it says two people that sit and they don't have words of Torah between them. That is a moshav leitzim. That is a sitting of scoffers. Two who sit and they do have words of Torah in that. Amongst them, between them, the Shechina, God's presence, dwells amongst them. And it quotes a verse to prove that. And then it says, I only know that's true for two. How do I know that's even true for one person who's involved in Torah study? That God gives that person reward. As it says, Yeshebad, it quotes a verse to back that up. Okay, so that's the Mishnah, just at a glance. Now the Midrash Shmuel is going to sort of pick apart this Mishnah word by word, line by line, and he's going to give us like 10 or 12 questions on the Mishnah, and then suggest a, I think, novel but beautiful reading of the Mishnah. Before we do that, we'll just, I guess, give some of the more simple, straightforward explanations that he quotes for this Mishnah. So first of all, he quotes from the Lev Avos. The Lev Avos, I'm pretty sure, is the Abarbanel, or Rabbi Yitzchak Abarbanel, who says that you also have to understand this Mishnah in context of the previous two Mishnahs. So this is Mishnah number 3 of the chapter, and you have to understand it in context of the previous two, and also actually in context of that verse in Tehillim, that very first verse in Psalms that I quoted. So he says, first of all, that the way that people should sit together is one person asks, one person answers, meaning it shouldn't be like people speaking over each other, and that's the first step. The way that describes them as sitting, and they have Torah between them, so it should be binachas. It should be kindly, which I don't know if we practice that so well in yeshivas, but that's what I think he's saying. Then he says that the Mishnah is telling us that if two people sit silently, but they don't share any Torah, so that's Moshav Leitzim. That's a sitting of scorners. And he quotes the verse from Tehillim. Now, the verse from Tehillim that he quotes is not proving his point. He's interpreting that verse. The Mishnah is giving an interpretation of the verse in Tehillim of what it means to sit among scorners. It means to sit without any Torah, which obviously, that's a high level. I think all of us have sat without Torah, but it's a good thing to work on. But he says that each of these first 3 Mishnahs are referring to different steps of that first verse in Tehillim. So the first verse in Tehillim begins that just to read it again, it says, "Fortunate is the person, or praiseworthy is the person who does not go in the advice of Rishaim, who doesn't go in the advice, the atzas Rishaim, the advice of the wicked." That is a reminder, or that's being interpreted by that first Mishnah, the first Mishnah of the chapter, where Akavia ben Mahalel gave us advice. Remember 3 things and you won't sin. So that's that person. If we remember those 3 things, where we came from, where we're going, and who we're going to stand judgment before, so then that's that person who doesn't go in, that person won't be going in the guidance and the advice of Rishaim, of the wicked. That's the first verse in Tehillim. And then it says, and b'derech hatayim la'amad, and doesn't stand in the way of singers. That's being explained by the second Mishnah. The second Mishnah in the chapter, which we started with today, Rabbi Chanina, Sgan HaKohanim, who said, pray for the peace of and the welfare of the kingship, because if not for that fear, people would swallow each other up. That is the derech chatayim. That would be the way of singers if they, if left to go undeterred, then they will go in the way of singers. And then the third part of that very first verse of Tehillim is what our Mishnah focuses on. The Moshav Leitzim lo yashav. He doesn't sit in the company of scorners. That this Mishnah is interpreting, and it's interpreting it to mean that people sit and they don't discuss Torah at all. Fine. So that's the Leiv Avos. That's, I think, again, the Barbanel relating the first 3 Mishnahs to the 3 parts of the first verse of Tehillim, of the first chapter of Tehillim. Now he goes on and then he quotes the Chassid Yavetz. The Chassid Yavetz, whose actual name is escaping me at the moment, but he says a couple of things. He first of all says that this Mishnah, when it says that 2 who sit and they don't have Torah amongst them, isn't even talking about people who are who are learning Torah. What it means is that 2 people who don't bring Torah into their lives, they are engaged in business, but yet Torah is not guiding them. So if they're yoshving, if they sit and they don't have Torah guiding them, so that's scoffers. That's a way of scorners. But if they do have Torah, so then the Shekhinah, God's presence, dwells amongst them. Then he develops a little further and suggests that there's different ways to engage in Torah. There's Torah and there's divrei Torah. Torah would just mean quoting verses, maybe like on a more surface level. Divrei Torah, words of Torah, would be exploring them deeper. And therefore the Mishnah is saying, two who sit and they don't have divrei Torah, sorry, excuse me, I think he had a different reading of our Mishnah. One second. Sorry, the opposite. It's the opposite. Divrei Torah is just quoting a verse or a teaching sort of at face value without delving into it. And but then there's another thing called Asek HaTorah. To be osek in Torah means to delve, to involve, to toil in Torah. So the first line of the Mishnah says, two who sit and they don't have divrei Torah, they don't even have words of Torah. They don't even say a verse. So they don't even say one teaching. So that's a singing of scorners. By the way, so many have the custom to, at least on Shabbos and Yantif, holidays and Shabbos, before benching, before Birkas Hamazon, for grace after meals, they say Shir Hamal, a chapter in Tehillim. So why do we say Shir Hamal? Why do we say chapter in Tehillim? So some say that it's for this reason, to make sure that we have some words of Torah, even if it's just reading verses, at the meal. Now, really, we're always, according to that, we should, at every meal, we should be saying a chapter of Psalms, and it should either be, there's another chapter that some have the custom to say, which is more sad, which recalls the destruction of Jerusalem. It's called Al Naros Babel, on the banks of on the rivers of Babylonia. And then on happier days you say Shir Hamal is that psalm. But it's kind of, in most circles following our practice. But according to this, that's a sort of an easy way to fulfill the teaching of this Mishnah, is to always make sure that we have at least words of Torah at our meal, is to just recite a chapter of Tehillim, of Psalms, before we conclude our meal. We don't always have, Torah at our fingertips. Not everybody can be so conversive in Torah. Some people can, but not everybody can. But this is an easy way. We recite a chapter of Tehillim and fulfill the teaching of this Mishnah that way. And then it says, but two who sit and they do have words of Torah. Now, there's different versions of the Mishnah. So it seems that the Chassid Yavetz, in his version, he had two who sit and they are osek in Torah. They are toiling in Torah. Then the Shekhinah comes. Actually, sorry, before we get to that, just to go back to the first thing. So it kind of raises the question, so I didn't say any words of Torah. So why does that make me a scoffer? I'm not like making fun of anything. I'm not scoffing at Torah. I just didn't say any Torah. Why does that make me a scoffer? Important question. So his suggestion, the Chassid Yavetz, he suggests he gives us a parable. He says that that imagine if a person is told that you have an hour, to count up, here's the treasure room, count up as many gold pieces as you can, and whatever you can count up in 1 hour, that's what you get to keep. And the person doesn't count any. The person ignores the game, the opportunity. So that is sort of scoffing at the opportunity, scoffing at the offer, basically. So he didn't do anything. He just sat there. But by sitting there and ignoring the opportunity, So he's scoffing at the opportunity. Says the Chassid Yavetz, that's what it means if a person is involved in bittul Torah, in missing out on chances for Torah. So it's scoffing at the value and the opportunity that provides. You know, the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, has lots of mashals, lots of parables along these lines about how we got to take advantage of every moment to get while we're in this world, to get as much Torah and as much mitzvahs, as many good deeds that we can. We're, imagining ourselves in this, really like this kind of thing, that we have all this opportunity to gather treasure, and how foolish it is to miss a moment even. So at least, we can say, the Mishna is saying that to sit a whole meal and not say anything, not even get one gem, one piece of gold the whole time. So that's scoffing at the opportunity. Okay. Okay, then he goes into this other idea about the difference between osek and delving into Torah versus speaking in Torah. I think we'll leave that for now, and let's go to the Midrash Shmuel and his questions and his approach to this Mishnah, which I think is very beautiful. Robert.
I noticed it doesn't actually say anything about a meal here. It just says two people sitting together.
Fair enough. That's a good point. You're right. I added
a meal is
a
common opportunity for that. And,
right.
And you benching at a meal is a way to make sure that at the meal. But even if you're just sitting with somebody for any reason.
Thank you. That's a very good point. I'm probably influenced by other Mishnahs or other sources that it's a meal. Actually,
it also, when it talks about one person.
Yeah, the next Mishnah talks about a table, is a similar idea, and it talks about sitting at a table. So I think I'm influenced by the next Mishnah. But it's a fair point. This Mishnah does not say that they're at a meal. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to learn a Mishnah the way the Midrash Shmuel learns a Mishnah. Okay, so we have to keep our finger on the place as we follow line by line as he asks as many questions. So number one. He says, we have to compare and contrast the two parts of the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah says, two who are sitting and they don't have Torah between them, and two are sitting and they have Torah between them. And then it says, that's two people, but how do I know that even one who is osek b'Torah, who is toiling in Torah? It doesn't say now, it can't say there's Torah between them, but it could have said in the first clause that they're osek in Torah. Why didn't it say two people who are sitting and they're not oskim, they're not toiling, involving themselves in Torah? Why did it say there isn't Torah between them? What does it mean, Torah between them? That's question number one. Number two, something we already offered an answer, but he asked the question again. How can it say that you're a scoffer if you don't speak words of Torah? A scoffer is somebody who says, "Oh, Torah," scoffs at Torah. But to not speak in words of Torah, I'm not scoffing at Torah. I just didn't have anything to say, right? So how is that scoffing? And what's the proof from the verse? The verse doesn't seem to offer anything that relates, that shows any otherwise, that you could be a scoffer without saying anything. Also, the verse doesn't seem to be speaking about the case that we're talking about. We're talking about two people who are sitting and they don't have Torah between them. And the proof of the verse is from a verse that says, praiseworthy is a person who doesn't sit among scoffers. What is that proof? So that's saying one person shouldn't sit with scoffers. What does that have to do with two people who are sitting and they don't have Torah between them? How does that prove anything? Furthermore, the reward that it offers, that it says, if two people are sitting and there's Torah between them, the Shekhinah, God's presence, is amongst them. And that's all it says. It doesn't say any further reward. For the next guy, the one guy at the end of the Mishnah, it says that God establishes reward for him. Why doesn't, here it's that God's presence is with them, doesn't say anything about any other reward for them. The verse that it brings to show that the God's presence is amongst them is as nidbaru yirei Hashem yishlareu. Then nidbaru, which again the translation here is words of Torah are spoken between them. Nidbaru is like a reflexive verb, though. It's like it was spoken to them. It's not that they spoke. So we're trying to prove that two people who speak in Torah are rewarded. The verse it quotes actually sounds like it's that they were spoken to in words of Torah. So why is the verse written that way, that they were spoken to? Also, at the beginning of the verse, it says that it was Yirei Hashem who spoke, fearers of God who spoke. And then it says, God listened, he wrote, the Yirei Hashem u'chosh v'shmo, those who fear God and think of his name. So the beginning of the verse just says they fear God. At the end, it says they fear God and think of his name. So why is that only appearing at the end of the verse? Also, the comparison between the two and the one doesn't seem to be a comparison. Meaning it says, I only know two. How do I know that even one who sits and dwells and involves himself in Torah, God also gives him reward? So it doesn't say there even that God's presence is with him, right? If you say, I only know that it's true for two, that God's presence is with them, it should say, how do I know that's even true for one, that God's presence is with them? But it doesn't say that. It says, how do I know that's even true for one, that he also gets reward? But you can ask, you can ask that, but that doesn't relate to the first thing. You don't say, I only know for two, how do I know for one something else? Okay, so those are some of the questions that he raises. I don't know if we're going to answer all of them, but we'll do our best. Okay, so says the Midrash Shmuel, this is what the Mishnah is speaking about. When it says that two people are sitting and they don't have Torah between them, it doesn't mean that they're not learning Torah. It doesn't mean they're not osek in Torah, that they're not delving and involving themselves in Torah. They're learning Torah. They're just not learning together. Two people who are sitting and each one is just learning by himself. And they're not joining together to learn Torah. There's ein beinehem divrei Torah. There's no Torah between them. They're not learning together. They're not asking each other questions. They're not listening to the other person's opinion. So that is where we say that they're leitzim. They are scoffers. Why? Why won't they learn together? Because each one says, I know enough. I don't need to hear anything from my friend across the table. He doesn't have anything to add. He doesn't have anything to teach me. So what am I going to gain from learning with him? So each one who sits on his side and won't listen, doesn't want to learn with the other one. So each one is scoffing at the other one, is sort of saying, I don't need you, right? That's scoffing. And that's what the verse says when it says, Uvemoshav leitzim lo yashav, fortunate, praiseworthy this person who doesn't sit amongst scoffers. Each one, is not doing it. Each one is sort of sitting amongst scoffers. They're both scoffing at each other by refusing to listen and to learn with the other person. Now, if two people are learning different things, then fine. But it's saying that if two people are going to be learning, something that they can learn together, they should learn together. They can each learn from the other person. And if not, they're scoffing at each other and saying, you don't have anything to teach me. But two people who do sit and study together, the Mishnah goes on, but two people who do sit and they have between them Torah, meaning they are asking, learning with each other. They do want to hear what the other one has to say. So then they each sharpen each other, they each teach each other. Then the Shekhinah, God's presence, is amongst them, which is the opposite of scoffers. The sages teach us that scoffers don't get to experience God's presence, but these are the opposite. They're not scoffers. They are not scoffers. They are listening to each other, and therefore God's presence will dwell amongst them. And we have a proof, he says, from this verse. The verse in Malachi that it quotes says, "Az nidberu," then they were spoken to. It doesn't say they spoke. It says they were spoken to. We ask why in the reflexive. Why does it say they were spoken to? The idea is that if a person is learning lishma, a person is learning for God's sake, for the Torah's sake, so then a person has to be willing to hear what the other one says and not just want to express my opinion. A person who's learning just to, look smart, even if they're learning with someone else, so they just want the other person to listen to what I have to say and accept my opinion. This is what I think it's saying. I don't care what you have to say, right? So that's not a person who's learning lishma for the sake of God, for the sake of truth, for the sake of Torah. But if a person is willing to be spoken to, if nidberu, if they're each willing to be spoken to, they want to hear what the other one says. So then that's when we can see they're learning lishma. They're learning for the right purposes. That's nidberu. That's one suggestion. He has another suggestion. Nidberu could come from a different expression with that root, which is to humble oneself before someone else. But that's the idea. It's the idea that it expresses that we're willing to listen to the other person. So then, if we're willing to listen to the other person, that's when then vayakshev Hashem vayishma. So then God listens and He hears, and that's a situation of where God will bring His presence to. That's what the verse is telling us, because they're not scoffing at each other. They're not learning only for their, to look smart with the other person. They actually want to learn from the other person. So that's where God's presence comes. And then it says, and it's written in the book of remembrance before God, because God understands their intentions. And then it's L'yirei Hashem el chosh v'shmo. It's not just that they're God fearing, but also chosh v'shmo, meaning they're thinking of God's name, meaning they're doing it lishma. They're doing it for the right purposes. That God is witness to that by them being ready to and willing to listen to what the other one has to say. So then they are chosh v'shmo. They are those who are thinking of God's name. They're doing it for the right purposes. And then the Mishnah just concludes that the same is true. It's not only true for two people willing to listen to each other, but even one person who sits and is osek in Torah and delves into Torah. So even there, a person should put his hope in God and is going to receive reward directly from God. So that's true even for somebody who studies alone, as it quotes a verse to prove that. So what he ends up doing in the second half is really focusing on part of our question was, what's the connection? I only know if it's multiple people. What about one person? What's the comparison between the one and the two? They seem to be different. The two people are studying together. And they're promised God's presence there. The one person is by himself. It doesn't say that God's presence is there. It just says that person will receive reward. The way that he interprets that is that the comparison is that they're going to receive something directly from God, whatever that means, and so how do we know that even one person will receive directly from God? That it's Hakadosh Baruch Hu Kaveh Lo Sachar, that's God who provides reward directly. So it quotes a verse to prove that. But I guess just to summarize, to finish, to conclude, I thought the main thing I want to take out of this is I think it's a very beautiful interpretation, at least in the first half of the Mishnah. And it's novel. Again, the simple reading of the Mishnah is that people are sitting, they don't have Torah between them, so that's Moshe Blitzim, that's singing of scoffers. You're not taking, like we said, you're not taking advantage of the opportunity. You're scoffing at the opportunity if you don't involve yourself in Torah. That's the simple reading. The Midrash Shmuel is suggesting a novel and beautiful reading. That no, we're talking about people who they may be learning Torah already. It's not that there isn't Torah on their lips, but they're scoffing at the other person. They're not willing to hear what the other person has to say. So I'm learning by myself. I don't want to hear from you. So that's scoffing. Two people that are sitting and learning by themselves and there's no Torah between them, that's scoffers. They're scoffing at each other. But if two people are sitting and they do have Torah between them, so that's where God's presence comes and dwells amongst them. Because if it's between them, if they're willing to hear from each other, that's the verse in Malachi. Az nidbaru, then they are each being spoken to. So then that's where God comes. God comes and listens to that conversation. That's a conversation of people who are respecting each other, not just respecting each other, they're clearly seeking truth and they're learning lishma, they're learning for the right purpose because they're willing. Somebody who just wants to show off his or her knowledge doesn't want to hear what other people have to say. They're not listening to the other people. But somebody who's seeking truth, seeking emes, and doing it for the sake of heaven, then they're looking to hear from other people. That's a situation where God wants to rest his presence. All right.
Yosh Koach. Thank you, Rabbi.